My name is Michael Oros. I'm the Executive Director for SNIA. It's great to be back here in Tel Aviv, third year in a row for the Storage Developer Conference. This year, as Paul mentioned, we're having a little bit of a primer on an education track before we get into the meaty developer topics tomorrow. So I'm going to kick it off with just a bit of a recap and conversation on why our industry standard is important. What's their value? And why is the industry collaboration? Many of you are competitors, your companies compete with one another, but you all come together to the same room to discuss collaboration and standards. So why do you guys do that? First, a little bit just recap. Everyone should be, who's not familiar with SNIA? Okay, no hands. You guys are the hecklers in the background. Gotta love you guys. So what do we do? Essentially, standards organization, we develop standards. Not only are utilized in the industry by the vendors that collaborate on these standards, but many of these standards actually go and become ISO standards. Those are critical and important because they get referenced then by governments and lawmaking bodies to utilize those standards. So it becomes at that point a mandate. If you want to play and sell your products in those fields, you need to then follow those particular ISO standards. If you're going to have a standard, what's the point of you need to have interoperability? That's the whole point of having those standards, is to ensure interoperability of products built by multiple companies in the same field or technology space. Whenever you have new technologies come out, education is the other cornerstone and important aspect. You need to educate the industry on the new technology, how it fits, does it displace something, does it coexist with something, and what is it? How does it benefit the users? So SNIA has, as part of its charter, educating the industry on these new and emerging technologies. And as part of that, we do it in a vendor-neutral way. This is important because there's a lot of education and marketing out in the industry from specific vendors, but they have their own slants and view on things, on how their company views that particular technology based on that particular company's strategy in the industry. The education you find from SNIA is vendor neutral, right? It does not have that slant. It's reviewed by multiple companies when we put it out and make sure that we give you the true story of the technology itself without positioning it beyond what it actually is and what it does. So quick recap, SNIA's been around for over 20 years now. We've done a lot of work in the industry and we cover a lot of areas. Some of it which many have said, hey, tape's going to be dead, right? That was been said for the last 20 years. Guess what? It's still around. That's one of the things that we actually do is a spec that's called LTFS. It's a file system for tapes. And it's still utilized today quite extensively. But we kind of divide our areas of work from the storage management area, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the context itself and also as part of next generation data center. There's a collection of new technologies and work that define the new architecture and the new realities of these next gen data centers in a cloud type environment and architectures. Obviously, network storage at the cornerstone, power and efficiency. This is an area that SNIA has excelled in. We have a spec that's called SNIA Emerald. This is an ISO standard. It is widely referenced and utilized by not just the EPA in the US, but across the world in Japan, Europe, and throughout other parts of the world that then reference those respective countries' power efficiency requirements. Persistent memory, I'll touch base again a little bit later on this one. It's an emerging area of data storage. The physical storage aspects, we can't forget about the connectors, the physical aspect. How do we connect things to one another to build from a component drive level all the way up to systems to large deployments in data centers and beyond. The data management for the protection, integrity, retention aspect. Security is something that is also cornerstone at SNIA. Every time we start a new project, we reference it and let our security technical work group know, and they then reflect upon it. So we have security in mind from the beginning of the process as we develop a new spec, as opposed to, oh, we've developed a new spec, what are the threat exposures that we need to now become aware of and take account into. Now, we look at that up front during the development cycle itself. And part of this as well, if you're here tomorrow night, we'll be talking about more on this topic as parts of the storage beers. Hope you can join us for some pizza and beer tomorrow night. Just the tremendous wave of laws that are starting to be thrown out, not just GDPR in Europe, but now multiple instantiations in the US at the state level. So you're starting to have state by state different laws on privacy and data protection that will impact what you as vendors have to account for and develop when you develop your technologies and put them out into the field for use. And the cloud storage technologies, of course, which we all love and drive us absolutely bonkers. So, why are standards? Why are these standards important? Why do competitors come together, travel, get together face to face, work remotely to collaborate with one another? Well, remember that old saying? Square peg, round hole. This is what you want to try to avoid. You don't. That's the fundamental role of standards is to avoid this problem where you have multiple vendors developing different things and in the end they don't plug together. What does this do? It drives the end users nuts and they're not going to want to buy your product, or they're going to come back and put new requirements on you to go make this work, right? So standards are the industry tools. It's the means by which we come together as an industry and turn those, we put the specifications around, okay, who's developing a square peg out there? How do we reshape this thing to fit the standard round hole that our customers told us that's what they require, right? So you don't want this, right? This is what you want to avoid. When you have one product being developed, it's trying to use the other product to deliver a service in the end, you don't want to end up with this, right? If you do, what do you need to do? You need an adapter. You need to account for, even if I have an adapter, physically, is the electricity, the power going to be sufficient, right? Just following this analogy, this applies to other technologies that we all individually built, but then ultimately someone along the line, either a system vendor, an integrator, an end user, has to get all these pieces together, put them together, and they have to fit. If not, they have to do more work, and that diminishes the value of the product and technology you just delivered because the customer can't use it out of the box with the rest of what he has in place, and now he has to spend more time and money, which, again, dilutes the value and the time to implementation that he could otherwise had with your product. So this is the physical aspect, right? The easiest in storage terminology that you want to associate with this is think of a connector, right? You develop a drive, it has an interface on the back end that has to plug in somewhere. So the connector on the other side needs to match the physical connector on the device itself. That's why we developed the standards. There's a group in SNIA that works on that called SFF. They do connectors, transceivers, and other work in this physical area that is absolutely paramount and important. When you plug in a drive, you want to into an enclosure. You want to make sure that you pass the smoke test and you don't have an issue. Or if the wiring doesn't follow a particular standard, you have a physical mechanism by which it prevents you from plugging it in, so you don't do damage to either the system or the drive itself. So that's the one side of it. The other is you don't want to necessarily have this either, right? So this is, think of 4 different vendors, all of them building a particular product, but they all have different interfaces on the end. They're all delivering like power, electricity, right? And on storage terms, think about they're all delivering NAND, right? Flash storage, but different interfaces. We need to work to have a single, as close to a single standard globally for these storage products that we develop in order to ensure the customer has a good experience. Now, this starts to already be okay, right? When you start to standardize, maybe this is important to leave options because there's already physical environments in the world that require a different way for you to plug into them. But this is maybe where you do the standardization. The other end of that cable that I now plug in somewhere into the rest of the infrastructure, we all agree that that needs to be standardized. And this can be standardized in its own way, but allow for the variance so that you have the multiple environments. So, and again, kind of in a storage context, think of, for example, storage management. We all have different storage subsystems or architecture. Some may choose to use SAS or SATA drives or NVMe Express or still fiber channel on a storage enclosure. But on the external side, we all agree that we need to have a SAS or a fiber channel that you're going to plug then into another machine or into the SAN. So that's kind of the equivalent of, okay, you can still do whatever you need into the box to account for your specific design requirements or thoughts, but let's standardize how we take this out of the box. So, briefly I mentioned storage management. This is an area that SNIA has done work for a long time in. SMIS is a storage management standard that everyone should be familiar with. You see here the list of member companies that are part of the SMI initiative in SNIA. And these companies have all essentially agreed to come together, develop the spec on SMIS on how do you manage the storage systems and infrastructure. Again, why is this important? Because a system that's purchased from one of these vendors, when it's deployed by the end customer, is likely going to land into a heterogeneous environment. There are going to be multiple vendors. But an end user doesn't want to have 3 systems with 3 different interfaces to manage the systems. They likely and most desirably want to have a single management interface that manages all of the hardware underneath it from a storage perspective. So that's where standard like SMIS is important, because you can have then unified clients, single clients, that develop management, value add, management and automation technologies on top of these storage systems, that all of them utilize the SMIS interface so they can manage different vendors deployed underneath. One of the latest areas of work that SNIA has done is, this is a new specification for storage management, SNIA Swordfish. Again, SMIS is still around, will continue to be around. This is an area where, particularly for new data centers and kind of a hyperscale environment, this technology is going to be critical. It addresses, it brings a lot of flexibility and unification for how you manage a cloud-like architecture. What we've done here, rather than the storage industry going and inventing a whole new spec to provide this new management capability that's needed, we've actually looked at what is going on and what was going on in the industry 5 years ago. And at that time, the industry was really struggling and looking at the server management aspect and how challenging that was becoming, and trajectory ahead of what its exposures and capabilities or risks were. So it came together under another sister organization that we have a strategic alliance with, DMTF, and they put a new spec. They started developing a new spec that's called Redfish. So when we looked at that and we looked at the needs, the future needs of the hyperscaler and these new age data centers, you really need to be able to enable your customers to manage holistically the whole solution. Not continue to manage your compute separately from your network, separately from your storage, but look at it end to end from an application perspective. And be able to do it from an application perspective, you want a unified way to manage all of those things. So if today you're doing the large storage vendors have been shipping Redfish in their systems for the last 2 to 3 years. If you're using Redfish, you are actually using Swordfish as well. So to make it easy, the storage standard that SNIA has developed that is called Swordfish is actually an extension of the Redfish spec. We make it easy for the industry to the extent of you can come to the SNIA website and get the latest spec and work that we're doing. But once we've published the spec and it's finalized that revision, we actually upload it to the DMTF site in place with the Redfish spec. So when you download, go and get the Redfish specification, you automatically find and get the Swordfish specification as well. So again, this is important when you think about the scale that these new data centers have to operate at, and the efficiency that's required both in terms of manpower and automation. This enables that automation. You're able to make smart decisions because from a single interface you're able to get information and take actions upon your servers, network, and storage all at the same time because you're utilizing the same standard effectively across the board. If there's any questions along the way, feel free to stop and ask me as well. But I'll jump to another example, a new standard that's now actually been around for a little while, persistent memory. And this one I like to I like to kind of take a pause and look at what happens when you develop standards and you don't take into account the whole ecosystem. It really takes the whole ecosystem to make something work. So persistent memory, you could say, great, understand you're trying to make memory persistent, let's go standardize that, JEDEC, go get it done, NVDIMM-N or P comes along and we're done, right? No, that standardizes the persistent memory technology, but it does not enable a solution to be deployed and utilized in the industry and to be valuable to the end user. You need operating support. If you don't have operating support for your hardware, no good. It's not adding value. If you don't have a variety of vendors, right? You've standardized the NVDIMM technology. You need to have a variety of vendors delivering that technology because customers, OEMs in particular, love to have multiple vendor choice when they build these systems and to ensure that there's a healthy ecosystem for supply. The standards that we talked about to which these DIMMs are developed, and then you need the system vendors that are actually going to integrate, validate, deploy, sell, and support these services. So SNIA realized this, right? We learn from past experiences. So I'll take a pause to give you an example everyone hopefully in the room remembers. When USB came along, everyone remembers that, right? You had the plug. It was around for 2-3 years before Microsoft even had support. You had a physical thing in your system that you could not use because there were no drivers supporting it. Then eventually Microsoft did start supporting it. what happened anytime you touched that wire, even by mistake you pulled it? You blue screened your laptop or your system. Why? Because hot plug and a bunch of other things were not built into the operating system. So USB today is ubiquitous. It works. You plug it in, you unplug it. It all just seamlessly works. We don't even think about it anymore. It's just there, and it's completely ubiquitous. But it took years to get there and to derive the value and investment that many companies made. Think about if a laptop vendor that invested millions of dollars in R&D to put that physical port on a laptop that nobody could actually use for 2 or 3 years. Right? That is money spent and no recovery or value delivered to the end user. So examples like that in the industry that we've learned from, and again, when we did persistent memory, we accounted for and started this work through SNIA, coordinated with all the other standard bodies and vendors, including the software from a OS perspective, and beyond that to what we're doing today in the other room is a persistent memory hackathon, which is to educate users, the phase of educating the application developers, how to program to it, how to take advantage of it. It's here, it's available. Now we need to have the rest of the community learn how to program and take advantage of these capabilities that the industry has put in place for you. A quick little aspect of where persistent memory kind of fits in into kind of a hierarchy of things here. There's essentially there's been historically this gap between DRAM and even the best performance SSDs, right? It's 10 to the 3 kind of difference in gap there in terms of latency, which latency is critical for high performance applications. So NVDIMMs essentially look to fill that gap. And there's multiple implementations, right? When we talk about persistent memory from a SNIA perspective, we talk about the programming language, the standard by which you make use of persistent memory in a solution stack. Persistent memory itself, in a physical implementation, there are, as a technology, multiple options and choices there. There's the NVDIMMs -Ns, right, which essentially you're getting DRAM performance with a capacitor generally or an integrated power backup to flash to be able to flush your data from DRAM to make it persistent to flash in case of a power failure. Of course, in the last year, there's been introduction by other vendors of commercially viable new persistent memory media. So media itself that has the characteristic of memory, so byte addressability, and persistence as well. And of course, the innovation in this marketplace continues. This shows the NVDIMM-Ns. There's NVDIMM-Ps that were mentioned on the other slide. They'll fit kind of somewhere below this in the hierarchy. So a lot of innovation that the persistent memory standard that SNIA has developed, it has trickled into the rest of the industry on allowing everyone else to innovate on this platform to address different needs, whether it's capacity, whether it's power, whether it's performance, whether it's cost, or any permutation of those vectors for these solutions. The last one I'll touch base on is a newer standard development area for SNIA, and this is on computational storage. So first, what is computational storage, right? So one of the aspects from an education perspective that SNIA does, we have a SNIA dictionary. When we talk to one another, it's important that we have a commonality in language and definition. So we've had a SNIA dictionary almost from the beginning of SNIA, and we continue to evolve it. We've now, by the way, made that online searchable, and we're able to add new terms and update them with much higher frequency than our past kind of annual or every year and a half update of a physical dictionary. So if you haven't taken a look at that, we brought that online last year since the event in Tel Aviv last year. So just snia.org/dictionary, you'll be able to find that. But this essentially, there's two foundational constructs that were defined: the computational storage devices themselves and the computational storage services that then advertise or that they can deliver. The easiest way to kind of put this into perspective, when this opportunity came, there's innovations come to the marketplace from a lot of different vendors. They were struggling because there was confusion in the definition. So SNIA was the perfect place to come together, get the industry together to define it. And by the way, kind of skipping ahead, this is where we are in about a year since this group started. There's over 40 companies, I think now it's close to 180 plus individuals, that are all collaborating in this group. And again, first order of business, definitions. They got that so they could all level set when they talk to customers and the industry and amongst themselves, they're all on the same page. I can't stress how important that is as a construct when we're doing industry collaboration in the industry. Second, to define what are the classes, right? So they agreed that there's two foundational constructs, and they're both important. One, it defines what's the device, but this is probably even more important to the industry in terms of enabling the computational storage services, because you define the commonality on how you advertise what are your capabilities. How do you advertise your capabilities up to the OS or an application to say, hey, I'm a smart device, I can do these things, so you can then take advantage of them in a more uniform manner. So that group has had several sessions. They've actually now have a version of the spec that's out for review and vote to be released, and they're already started tackling kind of the next level questions around how do you do management, how do you do security, how do you generally deploy and utilize these new resources in a application environment in real world. So with that, I'll just invite you for any questions I've included here, which we'll post these slides. Some resources for you, a lot of links and a lot of different things that we do. If you're not subscribed to the SNIA Matter, it's something, a monthly email that you get that gives you a summary of activities and specification or news from a SNIA and industry perspective, and also any events such as this one that we participate in, and you can join us or find your colleagues or friends, which is one of the interesting things of doing these in-person events, right? In today's world, you can do so much remotely, but the value of these sessions are great, but the hallway track sessions, what we call them, are even more valuable. Being able to talk to your colleagues, discuss problems, discuss opportunities amongst each other, and being able to network and reach out to one another when you're facing a problem. Luckily, more than likely, your colleagues at the other companies are facing the same problem. So why try to solve them all in parallel when we have the opportunity to come together and solve those common problems in a collaborative fashion, utilize resources solve the same problems, and then free up those the additional resources for you to apply it to additional innovation on top of those standards in common areas. Education, again, in the last year, we've actually deployed a searchable library. On this library, you can actually find content from events such as these, going back 10 years plus in many cases. They're all searchable by author, subject, event. It's a very relatively simple but powerful search engine that we've built for all of our education assets. We video record, much like this session, a lot of the developer conference, and we do monthly about 2 or 3 education sessions that we utilize our Bright Talk platform, record those, but then we also post those on our YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to the SNIA YouTube channel, please do. You'll find very informative sessions there, from just the basics of storage. We have a series of topics of what everything you wanted to know about storage but were too embarrassed to ask, and we have actually a campaign around those that you'll be seeing across SNIA here in the first quarter of the year. But we do podcasts. We have specific special interest mailing list. We have a blog. Obviously, our standards that you can reference and find out. And of course, you'll find us on social media as well. All of these, again, be available for download later with the active links to it. So it's an open invitation to please join us, get engaged as an organization. We are here for you. We're made up of members that have a common interest and need, and myself, the staff, and the key volunteers and leadership in SNIA. We're here to facilitate your work. Whether you're a large company, whether you're a startup, we have a membership level for each. You have a challenge that you see in the industry or an opportunity, please let us know. We're here to help, and again, it's a powerful way to take, in many cases, things from the very beginning and early stages of standards development all the way to turning them into international standards, ISO standards that are recognized and mandated in many cases across the world for the storage solutions that we all build and deploy. With that, welcome you to this year's event. Look forward to seeing you and having some great conversations. It's great to see both familiar and new faces in the audience, and wish you a great conference. Happy to take any questions if you have them. If not, we'll have our next presenter come and enlighten you with information on what else is new or fundamental in the industry. So thank you for attending. Appreciate it. Great to see everyone.